Inflection AI, which was started by Mustafa Suleyman and Reid Hoffman, who was a co-founder while Mustafa was working with him as a venture partner at Greylock. But Mustafa, as you guys know, was the co-founder of DeepMind, which Google bought for $400 million, really created the core of Google's AI capability and is considered one of the kind of preeminent thought leaders and entrepreneurs that has built in this space. He started Inflection, and the business just announced today that they've just closed a $1.3 billion funding round led by Microsoft, Reid Hoffman, Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt, NVIDIA, with an intention of building the largest AI cluster in the world, 22,000 NVIDIA H100s as part of the build out. But I think you've shared, Chamath, historically that these big funding rounds for these AI businesses that haven't necessarily even launched product yet don't make sense. Is this still, kind of reinforce your point? And, what's your read on the Inflection funding?
Well, the list price of an H100 is about 30-odd thousand, but the street price, so it's very hard to get it. So if you go to like eBay and try to buy an H100, it's like 40 or 45,000. So if you have a 22,000 cluster of H100s, that's about $900 million of capex, just that. And then, all the sundry stuff around it, call it roughly plus or minus $1 billion. And so of the $1.5 billion they've raised, let's say $1 billion goes into building this 22,000 node cluster. You have $500 million for SG&A. And so what that leaves behind is basically $2.5 billion of enterprise value for their chatbot. So I don't know. I mean, I've never used Pi. Has any of you guys used it? Do you guys know if it's good? Jason, I'm sure you've experimented with it. Have you experimented with it or not really?
Which one?
Pi. That's what their chatbot is called, Pi.
Yeah.
I think it's like heypi.com or something.
I think I did try it once, and it was not memorable.
Oh, yeah. Poe? You mean Poe?
No, not Poe.
No, that's Quora. That's Quora.
Pi is like your personal one where you talk to it and ask it, hey, how are you doing? And their concept is like you have this one relationship. So it's like one chat thread. It's not kind of how I like to work with I use threads and I share threads with my team. So I'm not a fan of this, like you have one relationship with one assistant.
I think the thing is, it's interesting to note that very rarely when you invest money in the billions of dollars, does the capex or purchase of one specific form of equipment take up literally 25% of the enterprise value. That's atypical, at least for a startup. If you're buying a fixed plant of a slow cash flow generating business, then maybe, a bunch of that has some value. So that's what stood out to me in all of these things. Freeburg is, again, increasingly, this is all just a pass through to NVIDIA. It's probably in some ways a pass through to the big cloud providers. So whenever I see a chip maker and a cloud provider come together to put in a lot of money, it's essentially round tripping cash. They're giving them money, which then they use to buy their services, and then you're just pumping revenue. So I hope it works. I wish them the best, but that's
given what we just talked about, where the infrastructure companies that are increasingly looking like more commodity service providers, if they don't up level with AI tooling, acquiring Mosaic ML and acquiring Neva, do you think that that's an indication of more M&A to come? And if so, doesn't that justify the increased funding, the increased valuation, and the activity that we're seeing in the early stage with some of these businesses?
I think for sure there's going to be more M&A. And I think the valuations will be high, not because these companies have a lot of revenue yet, but because it's very strategic for these big infra companies to assemble the end-to-end tool chain.
I think we should explain to folks what that means. Enterprise software companies provide software to businesses that are not traditionally technology companies. They also provide software to other businesses to help them build new tools, to help them build out their business. So an enterprise software company can sell to United Airlines or can sell to Visa or can sell to Ford. And that software can then be used by that company to build tools that are powered by the database or powered by the data analytics or increasingly powered by AI tools. And so they can build AI applications and AI capabilities into their business, whether it's United Airlines or Expedia or Visa or whomever. And that's why these companies are so critical in terms of enabling the transformation of industries with AI tooling, and why getting AI tooling into their capability set is so critical right now.
It's important to note, though, guys, that whenever you have the emergence of a new sector, Sachs, I think you are right that M&A goes up, but it tends to be that the valuations go down. Peak M&A froth happens at the beginning of the cycle when hype is at maximum and facts are at the minimum. And that's okay. That's good for the startup. It's marginally negative for the existing shareholder of a large company. And then over time, it gets itself sorted out when the facts are more obvious. So, it's kind of like, do you guys remember when the optical networking craze hit?
Oh my God.
And you had these multi-billion-dollar acquisitions.
Totally.
And where did they go? They went nowhere. They just disappeared.
We actually have like a market map that we did that I think can explain this concept of an end-to-end tool chain. So this is a slide that our growth team, shout out to Mike Robinson and Kevin Gabura, they put this together in preparation and part of the investment memo for Mosaic. And I think to explain the point you were kind of making, Freeberg, like why do enterprises need these services? One really simple way of thinking about it right now is that every enterprise would like to roll out its own ChatGPT. They would all like to have their own internal version of ChatGPT where their employees, for example, could ask questions and get answers. That's where all the action is right now. Every enterprise would buy that tomorrow if it existed in the way that they want.
Give an example of what that is, Sachs. Yeah, give an example.
The idea would be that, any employee in the company could ask questions to the AI model the way you can ask ChatGPT questions, and it would have all the enterprise's data, and it would also understand their permissions and have all the security settings so that only the right people could get the right information. That's the kind of intelligence they want to unlock. I mean, there are lots of other use cases as well, but that's a really simple one.
A corporate oracle. So I can, if I'm in HR, I can ask, hey, tell me about our, compensation. Yeah.
Totally. Copilot for the CEO. I think there's going to be lots of these. I think the sales team is going to have their own Copilot. I think the marketing team is going to have their own Copilot. And
customer support has it already. Yeah.
Customer support will have it. Engineers will have their own Copilot. So there's going to be a lot of these. But I think enterprises want one at the level of call it the company intranet, where employees could just ask it questions. But they do not want to share their data with OpenAI. That's very clear. They want to roll out their own models. So the question is, well, how do you roll out your own model? And what this shows here is the different pieces of the stack that you have to have. So first, you capture all of your data. You got to label it to be classified right for the model. You got to store it somewhere. Then you need to get one of these open source AI models off the shelf. And there's probably the most prominent site for this called Hugging Face, which already has something like, I think, a $2 billion valuation. That's another really crazy valuation to ARR multiple. But Hugging Face has kind of all the open source models. It's very active. And so people grab the latest open source model that's the best fit for them. And then they need to train that model. And that's really where Mosaic played. And there's a ton of activity right now in this last mile problem of how do you customize a model to make it suitable for your use, whether you're an enterprise, whether you're a customer service team, whether you're a SaaS app that wants to incorporate AI capabilities into your app. That's where all the action is right now, is customizing these open source models. That then leads to basically being able to get the right inferences. And there's sort of a separate category around hardware that is, we don't play there. But this is kind of the end-to-end tool chain. And I think these big tech companies are going to be racing to put this whole thing together.
To fill it out, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there'll be more M&A is your prediction, which means more startup valuation booming, more capital deploying. There was a couple of articles this week, and Chamath, this is your red meat as much as Ukraine is, Sachs's, because you've talked about this at length. Social messaging startup IRL is shutting down after a board investigation found 95% of its claimed 20 million users were actually fake. This is a company that in June of 2021 raised $170 million Series C at a valuation of over $1 billion, making it one of the many proclaimed unicorns of Silicon Valley, led by SoftBank's Vision Fund. The investor who was sitting on the board said that they didn't know if we've ever given an investment term sheet to a startup faster than SoftBank gave to IRL at the time. At the same time, different story, but in the same week, a company called Baiju, which Chamath, you have talked about in the past, was once valued at $22 billion and claimed to be India's most valuable startup, is in turmoil as shareholders and creditors are seeking to dilute the founder. And he's rushing to find capital and raise $1 billion to try and buoy the company. Prosus, one of the investors, marked the company's valuation down